Okay, so we're on YouTube now. I'm going to turn it over to you, Obi.
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting of the Planning Commission on Monday, 4/26/2021, and it is 3:59 to order. And I guess the first thing we're going to do is ask if anybody has any ex parte communications or disclosures they'd like to make. Seeing none. Okay. And then if there's any citizens to be heard who want to make public comments, this is the time to do it. We don't have anything as a public hearing, so if anybody would like to make some comments, maybe 3-minute limit, that would be great. Do we have anybody actually in attendance?
I don't see anyone. Everyone who has asked to join from the waiting room I've admitted, I don't see anyone here to make public comment, but if anyone is watching on YouTube and would like to make public comment, I'm sure we can work you in if you do join the Zoom meeting. And
I should probably just not wait for that, but go on to the next item, and then they can tell us they'd like to do that.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go.
Great. So the first thing on the agenda is a county commission report. I think that means Trish.
Okay, thank you, so I'll kind of start by saying I've been spending a tremendous amount of time, Abby kind of knows this, in Thompson, and not just pertaining to, I mean, eventually with the Planning Commission, it'll come to the Planning Commission as far as rezone and replat. We've also been talking about the cleanup. We're also having some kind of major issues out there regarding understanding water, and so I had a meeting out there the other night that was 4 hours long. I went out there again today. Like, I'm just really trying to do what I can to help that community out. And so just as a planning and zoning, kind of keep that in mind, that I think that community is really kind of on the brink of development. And it's been interesting to watch it, in the sense that I think the people that are really interested in the development are not citizens, right? I mean, I think there's a total of 40 homes out there. We're having a big push from an outside developer, and that's pretty concerning to me. And I'm not, obviously that's my opinion. It's just really concerning that we have people that are really pushing that development, but really not too concerned about their resources, so meaning water specifically. And so there we sit. And so currently, and I don't know how much I should divulge, my water board is basically dissolved out there. They're really tired of, they're all volunteers and under a tremendous amount of strain. They're getting a lot of kind of people saying, we're going to sue the water board. And so it's just it's really interesting, because to me, it's like this microscopic view of what our valley is going through, right? And so to me, it's like we have a chance with Thompson to really hopefully do what's right for that community. I hope. And OB, maybe eventually I'll have to talk to you in the sense, like, yeah, you guys have a very similar community that's a part of Grand County, yet, right, separate. And
it's somebody pointed out at one point, the drive-in from Thompson's probably as quick as the drive-in from Castle Valley.
Right,
we have to be blessed with a fair amount of water in Castle Valley. They don't sit at the foot of the LaSalle's.
Right.
Probably similar.
Yeah,
problem.
just so the Planning Commission understands, and hopefully that's really kind of where we all sit with development, that we have to have these other resources to just keep developing, right? We have to know we're going to have water, not just now, but far into the future. But Thompson Springs is named that because there are springs, you know, in that canyon, and that's the only water that they have. Talking to kind of the longest term resident out there, AJ Rogers, his father did a lot of kind of exploration with wells and never hit good water. He hit brackish water. And so, you know, they really only have those springs, and those springs are producing about 50% of the capacity that they were 10 years ago. And so I think it's right. It's really scary, I think. And so then when we have developers come to the table and say, well, I want 70 water taps when there's only 40 current residents, it scares the bejeebers out of everybody out there, which it should be a little scary, right? So just kind of thinking, it is kind of cool. The cool thing is there's some really young people that have bought like an old motel there. And so there's kind of a little bit of, you know, revitalization as far as young people coming into that community. But I think the idea of really expanding that community is I think we should really just tread lightly as far as making sure we have the resources for that. So that's where I've been putting a lot of time. But let's back up to the couple of big issues that the commission faced recently. So we had quite a few meetings surrounding obviously the noise ordinance, and then the land use code regarding ATV businesses. And we had a meeting on Monday, or if that was maybe the meeting we had with the Planning Commission the next Monday with business owners. That was quite it, and I was only able to stay. Oh, it was actually the same day as the Planning Commission. So I was only able to stay for like an hour, and then I came to the Planning Commission meeting. It was pretty contentious. They really felt, I think, that they were being, you know, that they were under attack, and we kept just reiterating, like, we understand your position. We're coming to you for help, for recommendations. Like, what would you recommend? You know, we're trying to do the right thing for the community. I think it got a little better after a while, so that's a positive. And then that same week, there was a workshop that I was unable to attend. Again, I was in other meetings. And then finally, we had a meeting on the April 15th, just regarding, so I think, well, I'll go over that. So that was the adopting ordinance approving amendments to the land use code sections 3.1, 3.2.3, 3.4.9, and some definitions 10.2. And that did eventually pass unanimously. What Christina laid out for us was kind of option A, B, and C, or 1, 2, and 3. And we went with option 3, which basically just stated, as far as ATV sales, that they were compliant with the current noise ordinance, which that hadn't been put into play yet. So, and then I think that was the big one for, no, I'm sorry. And then let me jump to, sorry, I should have had this in slightly better order. We went into repealing Title 11 and the Grand County General Ordinance, and a new 5 business licenses in conjunction with proposed amendments to the land use code. That was an extremely long discussion. It went on and on and on. I'm turning 5 pages of notes, 6 pages of notes. And we ended up, and that was kind of as far as caps, as far as fleet caps, we ended up going with a rental fleet cap of 18. And the recommendation from the commission was 12. And so it was quite a bit of, right, jostling to get to that. So hopefully you're okay with that. There was quite a bit of pushback from the businesses to have fleet caps. And just so you know, and maybe you already know this, but one of the businesses, you know, they doubled their fleet overnight before these things were passed. Like, they just, yeah. All right. And then on April 20th, we had another meeting, a commission meeting, and that was the repealing of Title 11, the noise ordinance of Grand County, and then adopting a new Title 11. And I'm trying to think, I think the main thing that was everything, we basically went with a DBA of 92. And I cannot remember what your guys' proposal was. Sorry about that. But we basically kind of went with, do you remember? Anyways.
Yeah, I think it was to go with 92 or lower if it was shown that that was possible. So I think that
Right.
fits very well.
I mean, right. One of the things that Christina kind of kept reiterating is she wanted it to make it, you know, something that we could actually enforce, and something that we could actually, if it went to court, that, you know, we would be able to fight that fight. And so 92 consistently, except for, which is interesting, there was quite a bit of discussion about motorcycles, and that we ended up going with the Motorized Trail Committee asked for, there's like an EPA stamp on the mufflers. And basically, if the muffler had an EPA stamp, then that was acceptable, because motorcycles inherently are just a little bit louder, if not modified by a modified muffler. So there was, again, quite a bit of discussion. Oh, and the only other thing was there was one of the standards was like the poundage of trucks. So we wanted to make sure that work trucks, so for example, like an F-350, a diesel F-350, would not fall into that 92 dBA because they're not going to pulling a load. So we just lowered, it was set at 10,000 pounds, and we lowered it, I believe it was to, I think it was 9,000 pounds. Yeah, 9,000 pounds. So that we would exclude those, like the F-350, if that makes sense, or like a F-550, or, you know, it's because they're work trucks, and we wouldn't want to fall into that, like stopping every, you know, stopping Moab construction and while they're pulling their Mini X. So are you guys okay? Again, really long discussions, a lot of input. Obviously, you guys know a lot of input from the community. And I think that that's the best we can do. Christina really is pushing this concept that hopefully at those levels, we will be able to have enforcement and collect data. And hopefully with that data, we can then return to the state legislature. So, okay, you guys good?
Yeah. Thank you, Tricia. And I just want to say too, you're doing a very thorough job as the county commission liaison. I know there's a lot of new planning commission members, and the county commission liaison has sometimes, we've seen a real range of participation from that person. Sometimes only attending some of the meetings, all the way to giving us very thorough updates. So thanks very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Tricia.
OB, you're on mute if you're talking.
Yeah, there we go. I was going back to the agenda, which of course I didn't actually print out the agenda. I think we have a staff report next. Is that right, Abby?
There's actually just one thing on the county commission action items report is that at the last county commission meeting, Chris Baird brought it to the commission that just the need for a code enforcement position that would work not only with the travel council on like illegal overnight rentals, but would also work with the planning and zoning and building departments, because we have, I mean, especially in the time that we've been short-staffed, have had a hard time keeping up with code enforcement complaints. And the more, the more that we add to the code with specific requirements, the more enforcement is going to be necessary. And the dark sky lighting ordinance comes into full effect over the next couple years. So the code enforcement person would be able to step up and do more on ensuring compliance across, across places converting to lighting. And so that was just a discussion position, but I'm hoping that that will move forward and that we'll be able to get that resource. And I see, Garish, you're raising your hand. So if you have a comment.
I just have a question, Abby. I've heard for several years that complaints that people who have code enforcement issues
Mhm.
and bring them forward. Rarely see any activity or
Mhm.
enforcement. And I'm assuming that's because we haven't had anybody enforcing the code. So can you kind of give us what has been going on
Yeah.
and what is expected with this new position?
So that is part of it. Another reason, the county attorney's office has done a lot of work over the last year to create mechanisms for enforcement that are short of a criminal trial. Their code enforcement before didn't really have a lot of teeth. It was either, if people were repeat offenders or if they didn't address their violations, the only way to take them into a legal place with that was through criminal proceedings, which most of the time people would the neighbors and the complaints would kind of back off on because that was a pretty extreme response to a lot of the code enforcement. And so the county attorney's office has already done a lot of work in the last year to put in place civil law enforcement. So there's that element is now the actual, there's a lot more teeth in the code compliance. There's more options to, progressively get more serious with people depending on, the nature of the violation and things. But, typically what happens is we get complaints from neighbors or, people in the area. And when we look into it, we really try to work with the people. They get first a 21-day courtesy notice that mostly clears it up. Sometimes it has to go to the next step. So the two big reasons that code enforcement hasn't been as effective in recent years are that the penalties were kind of out of line with the crimes. I mean, not, the violations. And that has been addressed, I think, effectively. And then also just the staffing. Unfortunately, code enforcement is something that I think has had to become a lower priority when there's more pressing things. So I was happy to see that the commission's office was looking into this option, because I think with code enforcement, it's tough to keep on top of it without a person who has that as their primary or, a huge part of their job description. And it is unfortunate that that people in the county are not seeing resolutions to their complaints. I mean, there's also, sometimes people complain to the county about things that, that we're sympathetic to, that are unfortunate, that are things you wouldn't necessarily want your neighbor to do, but are also not illegal, but are allowed by code, so I think sometimes people are frustrated because they reach out to the county and either, and the thing that they think is a code violation, actually, when we look into it, is not actually a violation in the same way that they're expecting. And so that's some element of it. But I think the biggest element is having the staff resources and having it be a priority for someone in the department. And so the expectation and the hope is that, that if this position is working between building and planning and, events and travel council, that there's so much overlap in what the code violations are, that person would really be the point person and would still be working with those other departments on the codes that fall under their department. But so hopefully, I mean, the idea and the expectation is that we'll see more follow through on code complaints and hopefully more resolutions. So that's still it was only a discussion item, that job description. I'm not sure if it's been officially updated or not, but I think in the last few months, we've really seen how important it is to prioritize code enforcement in someone's job description.
So does the commission want any kind of feedback from us at this point in time?
I mean,
the reason I'm saying is,
yeah,
years ago when we were developing the dark sky ordinance, it was suggested, and I may have made the suggestion, but it was suggested that the enforcer be part of the building department. And there was big pushback on doing that. They said, no way, no how. We just deal with the building code and that's it. We put blinders on to everything else. We're overworked, blah, blah, blah. So I'm really encouraged that the county is at least looking at someone, especially now that the time, the moratorium or the grace period for dark skies is coming up very soon for dark sky lighting. So we're really going to, in order to have an effective policy, we're going to have at least some enforcement. And it's probably not going to take a lot because word of mouth changes. It's like you don't speed through Wellington because some people will occasionally get stopped for speeding there. So everybody that knows that kind of slows down. And if people know that it's better for them to go ahead and get in compliance with ordinances than to go through a prolonged battle with the county, now that we're going to have somebody who is actively enforcing, or maybe it's done on a complaint basis, but who is actually there taking action, I think we're going to see a lot more voluntary compliance. So I'm really hopeful, and I don't know if the commission wants the planning commission to, have a vote of affirmation and, be like, yeah, go forward with this idea. We think it's really important or not. So I'm just wondering, did they ask, our opinion, or do you think they even need our opinion?
It couldn't hurt, and I think it would be great, Trish, if you communicate that as the conversation's ongoing.
Yep.
In my experience with code enforcement also is that a lot of times what you're doing is explaining to someone how to, a lot of times if a thing is brought up, they're like, oh, I had no idea. And, and it's really just educating people on what they can do specifically. And hopefully not as much of, really having to be more confrontational or having to progress deeper into the code compliance process. So, yeah, so it's still early in that discussion. I think that is valuable, Tricia, if you, just communicate the support from the Planning Commission, because I'm optimistic about that moving forward. And I think that will be a really meaningful addition to the county staff. So I'm hoping that comes together. So we'll be updated as we figure it out. So I did just admit a couple more people, OB, and I'm not sure if any of them are here for public comment too. The next thing on the agenda is just the recent building permit review, which is pretty straightforward. So if you, if anyone has questions on that, if not, we can allow OB to open it up for public comments again.
Okay, I think, so is there anybody here who wants to make a public comment? Maybe 3 minutes or so if they want to. Otherwise, we're going to go and talk about the survey. I think I see no one for public comment.
I don't either, so I think it's just people wanting to listen in on the discussion.
Okay, do you want to give me the, oh, there it is, share the screen. Now all I got to do is figure out the right place. And I think we are basically there. Let me, I will, going right by here. Here we go. So I should say, and Abby, you may be able to help me if there's a hand up. I can't see probably everybody while I have this shared screen. Emily, basically, one of the reasons we're doing this meeting with not much business was, let's try to get through the entire questionnaire so that we can have a semi-final version. That means one never knows when these things end, but we maybe can go through, decide what we really don't want, decide what kind of changes we want, and we can bring something that is more final than the versions we've kind of been working on for 20 minutes here or 30 minutes there. So I had decided that what we probably wanted to do is go from the top of the survey go through it. The first, I guess they're probably now the third and fourth questions, in some ways are kind of comprehensive. And I've changed the forms of them so we can say both, this is something I'd like to see, and this is something I'd like not to see. It's not quite what Josie had suggested, but she did say something about shouldn't we be able to say what we don't want to see? And they actually are different things. There's a lot of things people just don't have an opinion on. And we can see if you like the way I did that or not. And I guess we just start out, I believe we probably agree that questions 1 and 2 are good from previous discussions. Basically, are you a resident of Spanish Valley and Grand County, et cetera, whether you're Spanish Valley and San Juan County, a resident of Grand County, but not a resident of Spanish Valley, or not a resident of Grand County or Spanish San Juan County. We're probably okay on that question. And what area do you consider your neighborhood or general location, allowing people to specify this and not be a multiple choice question? He's moving. Now, this question would have to be formatted a little bit different. Oops. Go ahead, Garish.
I was going to say the same thing that you were going to say, or maybe not, but I think it would help to define what we mean by the 191 corridor.
Huh?
It depends on I'm sure that some people would look at Spanish Valley as a utility corridor, a highway corridor, the entire thing. But it might be better to say something like the Highway 191 corridor, and then in parentheses, are we talking specifically about the highway commercial or within a quarter mile of the highway? Or let's give a little more definition to what we mean by the corridor.
I think that's, Obi, would you prefer, I can share my screen and take updated notes since you're leading the discussion.
Sure.
I'll switch that, but while I'm doing that, you guys should discuss what you think the definition of Highway 191 corridor should be.
Great idea. Do I have to do anything to get you back to having the screen?
I don't think so. I
don't either. I
I'll
think
let
you're
you
in
know.
command.
And then after that, I do have a discussion in the chat, but first, I think it is good to have a discussion on the definition.
And I think we had talked about maybe including a map that would illustrate, that region exactly where we're specifying or what we'll define here in a moment.
Yeah.
But I would advocate for that. I think that'd be helpful for survey participants.
Are you envisioning it as only the commercial area, like only the highway commercial zones directly adjacent to Highway 191, or kind of all of Spanish Valley? What are your thoughts on what defines that corridor? Is it just the highway commercial zones, or maybe the highway commercial zones and the parcels immediately behind them? It could be a certain distance from the highway.
I would think that we could make it kind of general and say something like generally within 1,000 feet, or generally within a quarter mile, or give it some kind of non-definite description, but make sure that people know that we're not talking about Spanish Valley Drive extending that far.
I can get some of those maps drawn up like a couple GIS options, and I can put those out for approval at the next meeting.
Or the other thing would be, we could just limit it at this point to the highway commercial zone, and the map could just reflect that. So I mean, I'm throwing out some ideas about how to make it a little more specific without having the answer.
Yeah, that seems more in line with kind of what we're getting at, in my opinion. What Garish just said just like the commercial highway zone.
Okay, I think it would be valuable to include a little bit behind just the highway commercial zones, maybe, because a lot of those highway commercial zones that are split zoned are, would like to expand to be entirely highway commercial. And so maybe considering so the Highway 191 corridor is the highway commercial, any zones that include any highway commercial element of the parcel. And then that's the corridor, but we could consider the parcels behind those for context.
Yeah, I mean, we're also not like on the list, it includes housing and non-commercial uses as well. So maybe that does make more sense.
Okay, so I can, so kind of definitely all the highway commercial, maybe a little bit behind the highway commercial, depending on what's there. Okay.
Sounds
And
good. And then are you still going to do it? Are you still going to do a map also?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always useful to have a map to look at. That's not hard to include in the survey.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Grand County parcel map right now, and there is some kind of on more of the northern end of Spanish Valley. There's still some of that general business. That's how it's currently zoned. That is touching highway commercial. So, I think that could be factored in as well. So maybe just a tally in the category of not doing just specifically highway commercial, but including some of those other zones as they're currently zoned as well.
Okay. And if anyone does have things to put into the chat, that's great. I'll bring them up definitely by the end, but this one is relevant maybe to discuss right now. Elaine Gisler, who is the Economic Development Director for Grand County, asked in the chat, pardon me, will you be asking if they're a retired resident or an actively working resident? Is that, I think that would be valuable information for economic development to have. Is that a question that you think would be relevant to add, to include in this survey?
I would question Elaine as to what she thinks the relevance is, because I don't know why it would be beneficial to know whether people are employed or retired or.
Mm-hmm. Elaine, Elaine, if you are in this meeting, if you would mind unmuting yourself and giving a little more context on that question.
Sure. I would just be interested to see the population out there, or whoever answers, how many respondents are either retired or actively working.
Because that would help guide kind of future economic development.
Well, I think so. And if we're actually going to be sending this out to San Juan County residents, is that the case as well? That
wasn't part of the initial visioning, but that is, I mean, that could be part of the next phase, or that could be included in the first phase survey, I think.
And would you be sharing that information with San Juan County?
We haven't officially spoken to anyone in San Juan County about that, but I think that's a very useful thing to look into. I mean, I would see no reason to not share this information with San Juan County. I mean, it'd be very helpful. So
in addition to what Elaine is suggesting of retired versus actively working, is this open to second homeowners, or is this only for full-time residents?
I mean, that could be a question. Maybe there's a question to get a little more demographic information about people. That is, are you a full-time resident, a part-time resident? Are you actively working? Are you retired? Is this a primary residence? Is this your vacation?
I think especially the second home versus full-time residents would be really helpful information to have in here.
Okay. And, you know, so it seems like I think today we'll have a really good working through of this survey. And by the next meeting, I'll reach out to San Juan County and, you know, maybe include some maps. We can maybe sign off on the survey, and I can follow up on anything like reaching out to San Juan County or other ways that we could collaborate or just make this very useful.
I just think to be courteous to them, if we're sending it to another county and asking these questions, it might be a good idea to loop them in. I mean, I don't know how we'd feel if they were sending a survey out to our residents in Spanish Valley without us knowing. I just think it's courteous to let them know.
I agree. And my discussions with people at San Juan County recently have all been that I think there is a lot of enthusiasm for collaboration and for greater lines of communication.
Right.
And so I'm very glad you brought that up, Elaine, because I think that's I think looping in people from San Juan County is a really good move with this survey. And I'm happy to reach out from our office and kind of open that line of communication.
So, I mean, that's actually, of course, one of the questions Emily was hoping to address today, which is how do we inform people of the survey, right? And I'm not exactly sure what the plan is on how we inform it. I imagine I can't and I don't know, and you may know, Abby, how we informed citizens of Grand County anyway of the last survey. I think we sent out postcards of some sort. I want to be careful in that it is a Grand County survey in the sense of I'm not sure I want to get, of course, and I'm not sure anybody's suggesting it, San Juan County involved in it, their planning commission or their commission in terms of approving the survey or adding questions to the survey. Although I think the demographic questions of that Elaine suggested are probably pretty good things to have on the survey. And of course, we also have to worry about how long the survey gets eventually. So anyway, those are just my thoughts. And do you know about I know we sent postcards out, were they to addresses in Grand County?
Yes, they were. I believe I wasn't working here at the time, but I believe the survey was sent to every resident of Grand County and directing people to the online survey link. And so I believe we were planning to kind of follow a similar track. I think we have that money budgeted. I'll have to, double check that, but sending out a postcard, I also, and I don't want to stray too far from looking through the questions because I think that's valuable, but I think any ideas for how to increase participation from people who are not kind of the usual suspects on public participation. I mean, the people who are actively involved in public participation, I'm grateful that we have such an engaged, citizenry. And I by no means want to exclude anyone, but I think that on, you know, I if there's any ideas or ways to better reach people who maybe are not engaged in the public process historically, I think that would be very valuable. But I don't have like a slam dunk answer for that, but things to think about. I mean, hopefully one thing that with the small area plan, it was we were all very much in COVID protocols. And I think as the Spanish Valley survey develops, we will be able to do more kind of public meetings and more, you know, workshops and things like that. So I think we can do more, public participation events, and hopefully that will bring in more people. You know, we could look at doing it at the Spanish Trail Arena or someplace in Spanish Valley that, you know, would hopefully be easier for residents. And any and all ideas on getting participation, I would love to hear.
Are we good to move a little bit?
Yes, I think so. Thanks.
And so I am interested in people's reactions to question 3 and 4. I assume if it's one of these things, it's, I forget, SurveyMonkey or whatever version of it we used. I'm imagining that if this format looks good, that you want to see it. What is it? Not like to see, not sure, and like to see. We'd probably have 3 little buttons going across that clearly were associated with each of the questions. I didn't really even know how to put in a table here. So I'm not sure what people think about this particular kind of format, but one of the things that we will get is, well, that question's not fair, right? And these questions that allow you to look at all of the items and say you'd like to see it, not sure, not like to see it, seem a reasonable way of getting some initial view of these kinds of items. The other thing to always pay attention to is the questions that we're actually asking. Do we have the right kinds of things down here, or are there some ones that should be added, which we can do now, or people can bring to our next meeting, I guess, or in the interim say, oh my goodness, you've missed something here. Garish.
I can't think of any other types of commercial uses, but I do think that we ought to be consistent throughout the survey when we are talking about overnight rentals. And so here is rental condos. Later on, it talks about B&Bs. So I think we ought to be, I mean, it's like Mark Horowitz has told us several times that a B&B and then a house or condo or something rented on Airbnb are not the same things. So I think maybe where it says rental condos, we ought to be consistent with the rest of the types of overnight accommodations that are asked about later in the document.
So maybe have like licensed B&Bs in neighborhoods and like condo developments where overnight rental is
Well,
The ONRs.
Yeah, I think so. But what I'm getting at is to say a B&B. To me, a B&B is a place where somebody has a room that they rent out and they serve breakfast.
right.
To Airbnb, a B&B is any place that they can sell overnight,
Mm-hmm.
and people can make a bunch of money. So I think we just need to be consistent about what we're trying to describe. You know, is it a traditional B&B where, you know, I get up in the morning and I cook my guests breakfast and they sit down at our dining table? Is it Airbnb where you never even know who owns the place? You never even talk to them. Is it just a condo that gets cleaned by a cleaning company and managed by a management company? You know, because I think it's important. I think the flavor or the feeling I got is that people are not so concerned about a small little one-room rental of a room in their house if it's operated as a B&B and the people live there versus, you know, these condos that are overnight accommodations and they're rented out on HomeAway or Airbnb or another platform. So I think if we really want to find out what people think about the way it was written was rental condos. I think if we're going to use that term, then we ought to be consistent throughout the document or be more specific as to these are going to be overnight accommodations, condos, or whatever.
Yeah. Is there a better way to say it than the way I've written it out, like licensed B&Bs in neighborhood residential spaces where owners live on site versus condo developments that allow overnight rentals, Airbnb type overnight rentals?
Well, I don't know that anybody actually has a residential space within the corridor, but maybe they do. Maybe there's some residential houses within the highway commercial, but I think that would help, Abby.
Yeah.
And Garish, I actually like what you're saying. Of course, it's actually in the next question where I put bed and breakfast in, and that may not have been the right way to put it. In part, I put it there because I thought it was much more likely to be there, but it was a way, in fact, that I thought, oh, maybe I can ask this question in a neutral way that Mark, in fact, didn't like the wording of the other questions. But you know, maybe it should also be asked in the 191 corridor, which I didn't think it probably would exist there. It doesn't hurt to have it there. And I agree with you on consistency. How we choose to word these things here is if we decide that we need another question, I probably would use this question and maybe in 3 and 4 as the bed and breakfast question and eliminate the other questions that refer to it later on. So I like your suggestion.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe what we could do is take the I don't know. I think some other ideas from other commissioners would help here to try to narrow down what is it we're trying to describe here.
I feel like you could really just break it into bread and breakfast in both. Like, do you want to see bed and breakfast stay in the commercial area, or are you okay with them being in residential? And then include on both, you know, maybe just as wide as overnight rentals, because I think people know, especially if we're distinguishing B&Bs from ONRs, we just say overnight rentals, you know, because there's more than just condos, there's houses, there's apartments, there's whatever, right? But having them both worded the same place in both, and I think that's fine.
Part of this survey also could be, I mean, in an effort to both keep it short but keep it informative, we could have things like live links that link to the part of the land use code that describes a bed and breakfast, like a link that just goes to the part of the land use code that describes a residential overnight accommodation, or like, you know, for more information or for more definitions, because I think they are, I mean, the county treats those as 2 separate uses. Any existing, it is less of an issue for the commercial corridor because I'm not sure how many bed and breakfasts are operating in the commercial corridor, but definitely for areas outside of the 191 corridor, the way that the county looks at bed and breakfasts versus condo developments with overnight rentals, or, you know, the OA/residential zone, is 2 entirely separate they're classified in two entirely separate ways. And so I think it is valuable to split out those uses. And I'm kind of torn because, I mean, I think on the one hand, it's helpful to be like, a bed and breakfast is a formerly permitted use in residential zones that are now legal non-conforming uses that can allow to continue to operate in their current state versus, overnight accommodations. Residential zone are condo developments that were created with the specific idea that any unit could be used as a long-term or an overnight rental, and that those uses may switch at any time. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know the best way to include that in like a concise but informative way, but I think, I think that would be good to get in there if we can, and maybe that's linking it to people who want to see more detail, but not overwhelming people who want to take a quick survey with a ton of definitions and history.
Also, just so you know, rental condos is also included higher up on number 4 as well already.
Oh, thanks. I just need to.
And what I'm seeing, okay, we did get that out. Okay. Yeah, I was just seeing some overlap with like, I'm not sure if I see the need to go specifically into like condo development because that's multifamily housing. So we're getting a little redundant with that, I think. And if we scroll back up to the first one, or sorry, question number 3, there was something that stood out to me there. I just can't quite see it.
I just want to say the difference between, I'll go back to question 3 and just like the difference between multifamily housing and condo developments that allow for overnight rentals is that multifamily housing does not have an overnight rental element, and and not every condo development, there's many condo developments that do not have an overnight rental.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah.
So it's more like both essentially new condo developments with overnight rentals and new bed and breakfasts are both outside of what the current land use code allows, but the way that we've incorporated those historic uses into current existence is different in that, I mean, I guess they're both in a way have become legal non-conforming uses, but yeah, sorry, that's kind of a rabbit hole to go down, but I get your point that multifamily housing / condo development is one thing, condo developments with overnight rentals is another thing. They're pretty similar, but it's a fine distinction.
Well, so I wonder if taking out like the specificity of condo developments that allow for overnight rentals, just saying overnight rentals, and then.
Well, the thing is, there's no, I mean, the only overnight rentals in residences are either the B&Bs that are, little spots through neighborhoods, or entire condo developments where any unit within that development could be a long-term or an overnight.
Yeah.
The entire development is zoned that way. So it's like, I think just saying like overnight rentals, it doesn't quite capture this concept that like the entire development is approved for overnight rentals.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Like the Rim Village kind of a situation. Is that what you're?
Sorry, what did you?
Like Rim Village.
Yeah, like a Rim Village situation, and and there's a handful of those throughout the county. That when the overnight accommodation overlay was put in place, these developments had been created with that concept in mind that they could be long-term or short-term, and so there were a lot of units that currently were being used as long-term rentals, but the property owners would like to have the right to, at some point in the future, convert that from a long-term rental to an overnight accommodation. And so they still have that opportunity going into the future, whereas that's the only type of residential development that can currently convert to an overnight rental are these like specific condo developments where, I'm sorry if I'm not explaining this great, but it kind of, I'll have to think of the best way to explain that concept really concisely, because it is different than just a multifamily development or a condo development. They're kind of these like overnight rental condo developments, and it isn't every condo development, but it's also not just like an isolated house in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
it would be covered by the overlay.
Right, it's covered by the overlay. So maybe including a map or a list of those, or so, I'll work on a better way
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
Can I throw out a suggestion? Because I think we might just, because there sounds like there's so much nuance to this, and all of us commissioners, we're going to spin our wheels on this, and maybe this is something. I hate to offload anything. I know you've got so much on your plate already, but maybe this would be something where one person with a vision of what all of the nuances to this can clarify and make sure there's kind of omitted any of the redundancies, and then we kind of vote on that for final approval.
Yeah, I'll be able to. Obi has done an excellent job of working on this and developing it, and he and I can coordinate, and I can give that. I can review that, and if I sit with it a little bit, I can come up with a better way to incorporate that definition that isn't so long worded. And yeah, Josie just messaged that she's going to have to restart her computer and readmit, but so she's coming back. And then, yeah, Garrett.
Oh, I think to me it's clear when it's the way you have edited it to say residential developments that allow for overnight rentals. So that could include any type of Airbnb situation, whether it's a house, an apartment, condos. So I think to me that kind of clears things up.
Okay.
And it's shows the difference between a true B&B and an overnight accommodation of other types.
Yeah. I mean, I think those do feel very different when that's in your neighborhood. A B&B is going to feel different than a huge condo development where anything could be an overnight rental. So yeah, and in the comment too, Makeda suggested that no matter what, everything should be worded and listed the same under both 3 and 4 for clarity. And Steve agrees, and I think Bob and I agree too. In coming up with the final draft for approval at the next meeting, I'll work on some of the clumsiness of language and definitely make sure those two are the same. I think that's a good call on that too. So
Totally. I assumed that was going to happen, but I just wanted to throw it out there just in case. So thanks, Abby.
Not wrong to put anything out there. So okay. Are we ready to move on to the next question?
Sounds good. Oh yes, I do sort of. This I think is a question that Emily may particularly like. I got rid of outside the Highway 191 corridor. I don't know what people think of. I guess it's the Shell station and a few things up in there. So I guess such a commercial node might in fact end up in that 191 corridor if we make it a quarter mile or something like that. So I just aced that out. It seems like a reasonable question to me, even though it's open-ended.
I wonder if with this one, if we included a map and just did a quick little, circle over an area that is like kind of a suggested node, and people just rate their agreement with, yeah, that's a good spot or not. And of course it would be very approximate, so people don't have to get too detailed in there. I just think, in the spirit of nudging people into wanting to do this and do it quickly, whereas where you have something in your typing out several sentences, that's kind of a push in the way to, I'll just close my computer and get to this another day, which never quite happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can look into that a little bit and see. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. If we had a map that showed some potential areas where, some potential nodes that have been identified in previous planning efforts. I'll see what I can put together for that, but I think that concept is a good idea.
It actually makes the question more interesting, which is another way to keep people answering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, Abby, I don't mean to keep throwing things onto your
Oh.
plate.
No, we're doing what we can, but I think that yeah, we'll definitely do what we can to make this a quality survey as we're evolving it. So don't worry about throwing out tasks. We'll sort that out. Yeah. All right. On to the next.
I'm actually not sure of this question myself, whether it's needed. It's terribly informative
Yeah.
question about PUDs, which have been a little controversy has been around PUDs. So I really would love input from other people.
Do you think this could be one of those questions like Abby was saying where we cut out most of the contextualizing in the actual survey and link to it for people that don't know? Just because if I was retaking the survey, I'd be like, okay, like it's like a paragraph of just, you know.
My reasoning for including so much definition on this one was both one, an opportunity to give the official definition of a PUD, put that out there because there has been so much controversy, but also because I think a lot of people who've maybe heard talk in their neighborhood or who've seen a development go in that they really, objected to and was called a PUD. I think there's a lot of people who are not super familiar with the finer points of the land use code, understandably. And so I think that I was trying to avoid kind of a knee-jerk reaction to like PUD, I hate it, to give a little more information. But I also see your point that is a long question in a survey that's like we're trying to keep people engaged and moving through pretty quickly.
That's hard.
So maybe
it is a really good question. And I just, oh man, yeah, because it's really good. And I totally see what you're saying, because otherwise people will be like, I hate PUDs because one went in next to me and I hate that specific situation. Yeah, totally.
So Makeda, what you're saying is just a little, like you can click on the term and it'll pop up a definition. Yeah, I like that.
Something, yeah, or the more in-depth kind of explanation. But I do also see what Abby's saying. Yeah.
And certainly the planned unit development click there, that blue space does take you to even a longer thing. I mean, it's a very educational question on a thing that has caused a bit of controversy. And the question I have is, does it belong in this survey? So it's I'm torn.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, does it? This is an opportunity to put out, this is an opportunity to maybe educate people on PDs, or if it is in the survey, maybe it should be towards the end of the survey for people who want to get more fine grain, maybe this includes like the last 5 questions are like for the real nerds. Like,
are these all going to be optional questions?
I think so. I mean, I'm whatever you guys think would be the best way to do it, but
yeah, because we could even do, if we were like, like what you're saying, like strongly encouraging everyone to fill out every question, and then at the end have like an optional section or something where it's like here's really in depth for everyone who really cares about this stuff or that knows about this stuff or wants to learn. Yeah,
maybe that would be a good way to do it, is kind of have like this next one too, the HDHO ordinance, like that are kind of more real specific, like kind of group those into the like deep dive section at the end. So if you want to do the quick and 5-minute survey, we can get some really valuable information there. If you want to, if you have the time and the desire to really get in there on some more specific elements, then you could continue to that like part B. Yeah, Steve, what's your suggestion?
Yeah, I like the thought of it, because it sounds to me like this, specifically the PUD section is more of an educate, like the goal is education. I don't know I'm not sure I quite see how much it's actually going to inform the Spanish Valley plan in the future, because the bottom line is it's been added to the land use code. It's gone through the public hearing process,
Right.
and it's being challenged in court right now, as I understand as well, or it's going to be. So currently, I mean, it went through the proper legislative channel until tested and said otherwise, and so it's there for a tool to be used in in the specific situations. And so I'm not sure how much any information from this we get from the public is going to do anything, unless we wanted to like try to take that out of the land use code, which would snowball the whole other legislative process. So yeah.
I see your point on that one. I'll put that in the kind of deep dive part B section, and for right now, and maybe that is right. Maybe even though this would be a good opportunity to inform people, this is not really the context for it, and we're kind of muddying the waters on that. I definitely see your point on that.
Well, I have a little different take on it than Steve, I believe. If the majority of people, if a good number of people who are residents of Spanish Valley fill out this questionnaire, and the majority of people say that they don't think that PUDs is an appropriate way of developing land, maybe we would want to think about that. I mean, I think that PUDs is a really useful tool that developers can utilize, but that's just my opinion. And if the majority of people said, hey, listen, maybe we need to see about changing the code, that might prompt the county commission into telling us, hey, why don't you look at this and see if or maybe people say we need to get rid of the PUD altogether. I think that's a bad idea, but if we're serious about trying to get people's opinions about development, and most of the development in the county happens in Spanish Valley, I think it's valid to not hide it in the deep dive section, but to put it out there prominently.
Okay.
I don't think we're hiding it if we put it in the deep dive section, Garish, because it's still going to be in the survey. But then at least we're not losing people who would just say, screw it, I'm not finishing the survey because this is just too much for me. But then people who are interested can still do it. It's not like we're putting it on a different page or something.
Maybe it's just finding the best way to integrate it in a way that, yeah.
I think I probably agree with Kate on this. We've got, of course, it won't be called deep dive, of course, at some point. It also seems like the next, but I also agree with you, Gary, said it's sort of like the very next question. It'd be interesting to know if people in Spanish Valley would be interested to know, actually anybody in Grand County wanted to do the HDHO, get some more units of it.
Maybe.
It's so it might be another deep dive question. Yeah. That's
maybe I did a disservice by calling it like the deep dive questions.
Yes, exactly.
maybe I think like specific policy questions would be better, kind of general questions and then specific questions, and we could just have those grouped separately. So if it still is kind of on equal weight with the other questions, but if people are less, are more interested in giving broad feedback and not wanting to get bogged down in specific policies, they could just avoid, we could have those.
This is Rick.
Yeah.
I brought this up last time with the PUD, because I'm driving out through the valley. I don't know which areas have it, which areas don't. If you're going to do a map, you could possibly put where the PUDs are and label them with their, I assume they all have names, and possibly even with the high density housing type things too. So if people can say, well, I like this one, I don't like this one, I wouldn't want this replicated, or this thing's awesome.
And the county GIS map already includes layers that call out all the high density housing.
Okay.
developments. And I've actually spoken to the GIS person at the county about potentially adding the PUDs to that GIS map, and they haven't been tracked as cleanly as the HDHO ones have. I mean, they're all tracked. It would just take some work to go through that. So I can go back to that conversation and just say, like, the Planning Commission also feels like this is a pretty important thing to have as a publicly available information, and see if that's something that our the GIS person at the county is able to do. Because I agree, Rick, I think that would be very helpful if there was a map, so that people also then when they're learning about a PUD, they're not just thinking about the one in their neighborhood that like they don't like, but they're like, oh, all these other places are PUDs, and maybe that expands your thinking about the overall tool. I'll see what I can, I'll see if it's possible to get that map, because for other reasons too, we're wanting to get that. So hopefully that's something we can pull together.
And one real quick thing here, correct me if I'm wrong, the number 10, like for 10 questions is sticking out in my mind. I remember Emily saying, is that, OB's laughing like that's far-fetched. I just, because that's the framework I'm using here. Is that kind of what we're aiming for? So that's what I'm triaging the importance of different questions. Am I way off on 10? Is that what we're kind of aiming for?
We have a lot more than 10 in this draft, but maybe we could separate it into 10, the goal could be about 10 general questions and maybe about 5 specific policy questions. And keep those 10 general questions up front for the person that really just wants to, take 2 minutes, put out some feedback and not get bogged down in it. It looks like we've got the numbering kind of,
Yes.
the numbering kind of starts over. So even though that one is number 10 at the end, that's a bit misleading. But maybe after we've kind of gone through all the questions and sorted them, we could be a little more decisive about any to get rid of. So I guess this next one about the high density housing overlay is also, I think, would fit in that policy question section, if that's a question that commissioners feel is valuable to include.
It's a question, of course, I've highlighted it in yellow to say drop it. On the other hand, it is a question that I one time defended in an early discussion that we had, and then decided, well, it's, as I think Steve argued, it's a question that isn't particular to Spanish Valley, and it's already on the books what they're going to do with it. I'd probably put it in this policy thing for now, but we may end up dropping those. If we end up with too many questions.
I think that's good. I mean, I even deleted the part that said there's about 20 more units to be built, because at this point, for a project to get vested before I don't anticipate that those 20 units are going to be used. And so I think it will be the county commission looking at whether to extend, whether to renew the HDHO or, do these options as outlined here. So yeah, we'll move that to policy and maybe delete if we need to start getting serious. Yeah, Steve.
And I'm totally on board with that. And I would say any question on this, we just move all the HDHO questions to this latter half. And then if we feel like it's a necessity to keep it in there, we kind of morph them all into 1-2 questions tops, probably.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'm just moving these other ones from further down in the survey, and that's something I can put together, or Rob and I can put together for the next meeting, is condense those into 1 to 2 questions and then maybe see if they all just get the axe.
I like that suggestion.
You like that? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Okay, so now we are at questions 6 and 7. Oh, there you go.
I like question 6 the way it is. And it is, I guess, just a way to keep track of trails and public land access points. And I'm going to defer maybe to Gary, who knows more about this topic. Maybe even Gary should put this question in here in terms of the question is, do we already know this from other people putting it down, or is this something we really need to know?
I think it would be helpful for the identification of access that to be made known to the county, because it turns out that there are several well-used trails that were not included in the county trails plan, and they could have been if people had said, "Hey, what about this trail? What about that trail?" I remember a few years ago, Ben Bird came in with a proposal out in the valley, and there was a trail, a neighborhood trail that accessed public land, or SITLA, that most people on the planning commission had no clue of. And so it was brought up that, well, it's not on the county trails plan. There's no way that in this development, a condition of the development could be that the county might require that trail to be left open. And a similar situation happened with a development up in Cayena Heights, where there's a historic trail that wasn't on the county trails plan. There was one that was on the county's trails plan that basically the county came down pretty firm and said, in order for you to have this development, you will maintain access through this property on this historic trail. So it's not like super, super critical, but it would be very helpful the next time the county trails plan is revised to know where these places are. And then it could be decided at that time whether to include them or not.
I think that's a good idea. Garish, I'll reach out to Maddie Logowitz, who's the director of the Active Trails and Transportation, and see, and loop her in on this concept, but also maybe she has a good map that shows where the identified trails are.
Yeah, the map is with the county trails plan has been revised at times, mostly I think to include new motorized and non-motorized routes. So it should be pretty well up to date, but I think talking to Maddie about this is a great idea.
I think the other thing that's interesting to know, like we just got a letter today, and I know that it's been an issue, like the pipe dream, the South Pipe Dream access, the Hidden Valley. I mean, that trailhead is now just overwhelmed, and that community is really reeling from that. And so I think that information is of interest, right?
That's certainly in agreement with what I had thought. Is the other thing is, it's the kind of question that, let's say if somebody asked me that about Castle Valley or a particular neighborhood in Moab, I think a lot of people would say, I don't know any trails, but people who both used the trails or had one that went through property that was near them might. So I don't think it would take a lot of time to ask it.
And some little trail segments or routes that people use, kids going back and forth from one neighborhood to another, they're not really designated trails, and they may never be designated as a trail on a map, but it's important to know when there are encroachments proposed or new developments proposed that, hey, listen, this neighborhood
Yeah.
The kids in this neighborhood depend on this as a safe route to get from Billy's house to Johnny's house, or, whatever the case may be. And as public facilities like new parks hopefully are created, having safe access to those for particularly kids is, I think, really important.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
we're probably good to move then. Is that probably right from comments I've heard?
Yeah, and Steve jumped in the chat just saying he supports that, and the trail access is a major part of quality of life. So yeah, I think this is good to include, and I'll get information from Maddie and include some map resources to help jog people's memories too.
Great. Question number 7, which has been made into a multiple choice question. What types of transportation would you like to see in Spanish Valley? Please circle all that you would like to see: bus service, walkability, bikeability, van service for the elderly and others, and then other services, please specify. I'm going to.
Great about that.
Yep. Oh, there we go, Makeda.
Also, I'm sorry to do this, but it's actually Makeda, everyone.
Makeda, I'm sorry.
Correct.
That's
Makeda.
what it was. No, you're good. I just looking
Yeah,
for.
no, I know I'm bad to do that.
Yeah. Okay, so.
I would probably suggest, continue to suggest letting 8
I'll move that.
go, because we now have that already.
Yep.
Good.
I guess that's already included. You need to be a policy.
Yes, so that means literally letting go at this point.
Yeah, I
not
think
moving. Yeah.
you're right. I think that is captured in the other questions. So looking at, okay.
Okay. Is that really, we're really there?
Actually, going back up to the transportation
Yeah.
question, and maybe it's just not safe to assume, just knowing that we have to select our questions wisely, I just kind of feel like everybody's going to want those things. And that's like, could we maybe just count on people who want those things? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing it out there. It's not always safe to assume, or can rarely be, but kind of just seems like those are all things that people tend to want anyways, and we know that.
Yeah.
With you, Steve, I could also see people being like, I don't want buses driving out here. There's already enough commercial traffic or whatever, but I'm with you. Yeah.
I'll highlight that one. We've been highlighting the ones that are maybe kind of on the fence, and then see if there's a way to incorporate that, or maybe that's just one of the ones that gets cut out when we have to edit the survey down.
That makes sense to me. So this is a question I thought was probably valuable to have, given that there is agriculture ranch land out in Spanish Valley. I didn't write this question. Somebody else had suggested it. Seemed reasonable to me.
I think this is a great question, OB. This is one that I've had quite a few people really push for.
Great. That's definitely one we'll keep in there then.
We're gonna, keep it there. Guess down to 12.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, I think this one could be looped into the policy questions. So I'm just gonna move that down there, and then we can go over the ones that were cut out already.
And yes, I also agree. We now have a lot on this kind of idea of high density that if we can get it down to 2 questions, or one, we'll make a lot of progress, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think we can incorporate all those concepts into like 2 questions in the policy section. So.
Yeah, and of course, this is one that let's see. Oh, yeah, we decided, I think, on 13 to get rid of it because we could probably, traffic surveys probably will end up determining this. And we had a bit of a discussion on it the other day. So I would suggest we drop 13. And then I think 14 has kind of been incorporated in those, I guess, questions 3 and 4 about whether you want, stores are in there, movie theaters, offices are probably in there for question 14.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like 13 and 14 can both go, in my opinion.
And
All right.
see, and then and this other B&B question, I think B&Bs are now in there, and Mark really didn't like the 2 B&B questions. He said they were kind of prejudicial.
Mm-hmm.
Can we just make it be an overnight, like ONRs thing?
Yeah, I think this is one also. I can move this down to the policy question section and incorporate those concepts into, because I kind of feel like with the PUDs for a policy, like in the policy question section, we could give a little context on the B&Bs and what differentiates those. We could give a little context on the 2 styles of homes being used as overnight rentals, the B&Bs and like the residential condo developments, and maybe work that into like 1 or 2, maybe 1 question would. Anyway, I think that's one that can be moved to the policy question section, and that the kind of more specific nuances on B&Bs versus overnight rentals, all that stuff we can work that in a more involved question.
Yeah, I really do think that B&Bs don't necessarily need to be part of that question, because I never hear anything about, and I'm I only hear from a specific group of people, but I never hear anything about B&Bs being people's concerns. It's usually Airbnbs and stuff. So.
Well, I think there has been. I know my office has received a lot of calls of people who would like to occasionally rent a room in their house. Things. So maybe this could help provide a little more context or a little more information for the county commission should they want to revisit allowing, some sort of limited bed and breakfast back into residential zones. I don't know that there's really the appetite for that currently, but just a thought.
Yeah, my recollection is that the legitimate B&Bs were kind of thrown under the bus because people were so upset with the Airbnb model in neighborhoods in Spanish Valley. And the county council at the time was given an option of allowing B&Bs to continue to be licensed in residential areas with constraints, but reasonable constraints, at the same time as they were given the choice of whether to allow Airbnb type facilities in Grand County. And unfortunately, the B&Bs got voted down at the same time because there was a lot of clamor and public pressure put on the council to get rid of them because of a few bad apples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that would be valuable. And also, Mark Horwitz did post in the chat. He's in this meeting asking if there was a second citizens to be heard, because we have typically been doing a second citizens to be heard at 5 or after. And so, OB, if you are amenable to that, you could open up now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, if you can, we haven't had a lot of public comments, so maybe you can limit yourself to 5 minutes at max for public comment, but go ahead, please.
You see and hear me?
Yes.
It wasn't my inclination to speak now. I was going to wait till the end, but let me just make some things. First, I will say I'm extremely relieved and very grateful and deeply honored that I have been heard by this commission with the comments that I've heard, your intention to differentiate between bed and breakfast and overnight rentals. That said, I will leave that alone and make several comments. I appreciate that Elaine made comments about, do you work or are you retired? I've asked in the past, and I'm curious why it would not be important to know, do you own property and pay property taxes in the Valley? Secondly, there's a misconception about Airbnb. They do, they have ruined communities by allowing anybody to rent their place via Airbnb. But I only rent through Airbnb because they're review driven, and I tell my guests they are to be quiet and for me, and they are to be respectful of my neighbors. And if they don't, they get canned from Airbnb. They get a bad review for Airbnb. The GIF map. I'd like to see a GIF map of B&Bs so we know where they are. And lastly, the comments, Will, that the deep dive comments. I picture this survey being something of a ramp that gets steeper and steeper, and you can drop out of the survey at any time you like. But those who are most interested will go deeper and deeper, and they'll look at those maps and they'll check out those things. Lastly, I want to say, in particular, Garish, gosh, you're really stepping up for me. I am very, very grateful that you've heard my comments comparing B&Bs to overnight rentals. And those are the two permits, overnight rental and B&B. Comparing the two is like comparing apples to onions. And thank you. I'm really very, very grateful today for your discussion.
Thank you, Mark.
I think
Okay, yeah.
just one in his comment, he did say, I think I'll find a better way to classify the overnight rentals outside of neighborhoods, or the condo development overnight rentals, not including Airbnb style, because that is confusing. Everyone's on Airbnb. But
yeah, interesting. Are we really down to question 16? And of course, we've eliminated many. It'll be interesting to know how many questions we have that are not in these policy questions, which will cut down. So, have you experienced problems with UTV in your neighborhood or Spanish Valley roads? And then several options. Garish.
I would say that unless people are deaf and they live in Spanish Valley, everyone will answer yes to serious problems, or there are some problems. A few people might say very few problems, but I'm wondering about the timeliness of this. The county is well aware of the issue of UTV, ATV nuisance, and maybe if we're going to be cutting questions, this ought to be one that we cut from the survey.
I do wonder though, Garish, if we're collecting data again for possibly going to the legislature, next year, that we wouldn't want this data. I'm just throwing that out.
Right. Okay. So if that's the reason that we want to include this in, Tricia, I certainly can understand that. So I appreciate that comment.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really great point, Trish, that I think, that might actually be a really great way to get some of that data. One thing I will throw out there is I have just heard this from the community, is that some people may very well rate that as no problems at all, because UTVs for them, it's a solution. It's a livelihood. It's an income. I don't personally agree with the noise they make. I just want to put that voice out there as kind of a little bit of balance to our commission, and just know that there are folks that they love the sound of them. Not a whole lot though.
Yes, Rick.
Is it legit to put a question out there possibly if people are having problems with those who camp just anywhere?
So are you having a problem with illegal camping in your neighborhood? Like a question like that?
Right.
That is a very topical issue. I think,
I see it quite often. So
yeah,
and it goes back to that part of the question where do you want to see the county enforce something along those lines? I don't know. I may be the only one.
That's a great question, Rick.
I can see it out my window. So
yeah. And as a person who can on the code complaints, that's definitely a very common complaint is that, and maybe I'll look at the questions here, find the best way to incorporate that, but both of like tourists just getting exasperated and pulling over somewhere, and then also illegal camping in that it's people are living in RVs on properties. So I'm just putting this for my notes. I'll clean this up, That's, yeah. Are there other elements to that question about illegal camping that are not captured in that very simple question? Are there? Okay.
So it is on to 17, the second 17, but they're all misnumbered at this point.
Yeah. Well,
So this is a question that I guess is probably relevant to, and Trish can probably help speak to this to Spanish Valley folks in terms of what they want to see. Any comments on this question?
I've got two. One is instead of saying more affordable housing, maybe say less expensive housing.
I would say it probably wasn't my question originally, but I should have caught it. Yes. Yes.
And then it seems kind of redundant to say the next to the last bullet is escape UTV noise. And I'm not sure there are places in Spanish Valley where you can totally escape UTV noise.
maybe we could say something like I guess peace and quiet is already on there as an option. Maybe find a way to incorporate kind of a larger, I don't know, less hustle and bustle, less traffic noise, less
traffic noise.
Maybe less traffic noise.
I mean, I feel like we already
And that
kind of
peace
said
and quiet.
environment
Yeah.
and peace and quiet. I was gonna say rural living, but we kind of already have both of those things.
Yeah. Because peace and quiet and rural environment with wildlife. Okay.
Unmute myself, got it. Again, the first of these, 18, I think may be captured in the questions 3 and 4. At least I thought so. The accessory dwelling units, this may be another policy type question, and maybe should be moved down to the policy type questions.
Yeah, and I think I'll look at elements of ADUs. Anyway, have a question on ADU that's the same idea, kind of gives a little more background and information, and then.
Yes, I think that would be great. And I probably originally went through this thinking, well, we probably should eliminate these policy questions, but they may have some relevance. It wasn't that I didn't think they had relevance, actually. It was thinking that maybe the survey was going to get long and complicated having them.
So
Are
Bob,
you?
do you
Yes,
know who brought up the ADU question in the first place?
I do not, I'm not sure.
I don't,
You know?
yeah, I mean, Garish, originally, Liz Thomas and Bonita Kolb really, gave a lot of questions, kind of, I just threw it out to them, like, hey, can you guys kind of take this ball and run with it? But I don't know. I do know that Kevin Walker, has brought up the whole concept of ADUs, like, is that a sustainable, you know what I mean? Like, it might be good to get some opinions on ADUs in the sense, like, has that really worked out as people were hoping,
I think that's a good way to maybe approach it, Tricia, because asking a question like, should ADUs be limited to family use is a big policy change. And I don't know, without knowing who or what the intent was of even asking that question, I don't know. I don't understand why we would be asking it. Not
Right.
to say that it's not a good question to ask, but the idea of ADUs is that it would give us more rental stock for long-term housing.
Right.
And I've never heard anybody ever bring up it should be restricted to family use. So I'm just kind of confused as to, where this question came from and why we would even be asking it.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe the family use component isn't necessary, but I don't know. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, maybe there's
It-
a question about ADUs where restricting it to family use is one of the myriad options of how to look at ADUs. I think this specific question is not great, but yeah, I think limiting it to family use could be one option. I don't have,
Right.
I should say, I can't think, I haven't been in this department for very long, but I can't think of a time that I've never had anyone call and complain about ADUs. People have specific neighbor complaints, but a lot of these other policy questions are ones that have been more kind of in the public eye, kind of had more, controversy.
Okay.
And ADUs, at least currently, I don't see getting that same attention. I have,
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, then whatever you guys want to do, I think we could dump it if we don't feel like it's an issue, for sure.
I'll see for the next time. I'll see if I can I'll see if there's an ADU question where that family use could be one of the options, and then we can maybe just decide to scrap it if need be at that point. Okay. All right, so I think we're on to 20.
Question 20. Yes, this was my attempt at a water question. I'm not sure it's the best, but I know people have concerns with water, not only in Thompson, but with probably almost any development in Moab, Spanish Valley, whether it's a concern or not. So I'm ready to be hit.
I really like
I
where
think
this is going, but I feel like maybe a thought to tweak it a little bit could be like, do you think that culinary / drinking water, whatever, should be more considered more highly in development or something? Something that's like getting at like, should this be a larger concern or consideration for people? When development is being considered, as opposed to being concerned. I think we're all maybe concerned. I don't know.
I wonder if, I wonder if something more actionable might be appropriate. Like, do you support, or to what degree do you support the metered use of culinary water? Because I look at this and we see this data. I think we get all these citizens and they say, yes, I'm worried, as much as you can be. that doesn't really tell us much because, I mean, as I understand it, I know there's so much to this, but I mean, we've got to wait for these water studies to come out, and these are going to be largely dictated to us by the state. So I'm not, I'd be more curious to see, like, are people in favor of like paying for what you use? Because it's crazy. I mean, I know someone who has like 10 to 15 horses on their property with, and they live on the property, and they pay the same for water, culinary water, as I pay for, my wife and me and a little dog in a 300 square foot house. Like, that's kind of crazy. So sorry, I'm going down rabbit holes, but I wonder if making it more actionable and seeing what people's actual perspective on, using for what they use, because, growth happens. We need to just use less is the bottom line.
Yeah. I like that. I'm just throwing out random ideas because this question, water really concerns me. Do we throw in something like you said, Steve, that's actionable, like with further development, that there would be, I don't know how you would see, I don't know anything about, gray water systems and right, like, with, as far as the planning commission goes, as we move into further development, do we start, putting those, regulations on them? Like, you have to capture your gray water. You have to, I don't know.
Yeah, or like a percentage of
I'm just rambling.
or something. Yeah. Do we?
I'm thinking maybe that's a policy question too, for the policy section, and kind of including a little more data in that question, in the same way that we are like with the PUD and the HHO and the, B&Bs, is like including a little more context, maybe linking to some of the recent presentations and studies on water that have come out, and finding a way to ask. And it seems like the questions we want to know is to what degree are people worried about water in the county? And then in what ways or to what degree do they think water should be factored into decision-making about development? Is that right? Yeah.
I do. So I want to propose just kind of an opposite approach to that, because I think, if we want to develop economically in this county, by looking at things, by looking through the lens of, well, we don't have enough water, we can't grow it all. I think that's the wrong lens to look through. I think we need to look through the lens of, we understand we have limited water. We need to do a far better job of cutting back currently. And I think it would be a great idea to get a pulse on people's attitudes on how they would respond if, they had to pay more for using, overconsumptive amounts. I think that would be really telling, because then we could pass that down to the commission to, see about, charging more for the water. Because I mean, it's the thresholds, at least for GWISA, Grand Water County and Sewer, whatever it stands for, the thresholds are pretty big chunks before you actually like notice any more on your water bill, from what I've seen. And people use a lot of culinary water for reasons that if they felt the pinch in their wallet a little bit more, I think we would use less water, and then we could still encourage growth in ways that are ultimately smart, because we would have enough of water to support it.
So you don't think that limiting or slowing development or growth is important for water consumption?
That's a part of it, but I think to just say, hey, no growth because we don't have water, when, if I'm using far too much water, I think, we can do both things at once, limit current usage. And anyways, sorry for getting too theoretical down the rabbit hole, but I think, just me personally, I think it would be great to see what Spanish Valley, in part of the county, what their impression is on how they'd feel about having to pay more for water.
Maybe the question is, what types of water conservation measures would you support? And one of those is limiting development. Another one is charging more. And then one could be, I see no need to conserve water.
That sounds great, Abby. That seems like a really good way to round this out.
I
Okay.
agree.
And
I really,
oh,
sorry, go ahead, Obi.
no, it looked like Garish has been unmuted. I bet he has something to say. I have something to say at some point too.
I was going to try
But
to
Trish,
type
you're
it
next
in.
after Gary.
I was going to try to type it in response to McKenna and Steve, but I think a question like, would you support a county ordinance that that restricts the use of turf grass for lawns? And would you support a county code requirement that use xeriscape rather than put in, grass or, whatever, but make it more actionable? Like, what would you support? Would you support the county putting these restrictions in, that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. I think that could be incorporated into what types of conservation measures would you support? And yeah, definitely have one of those being a requirement for xeriscaping or a requirement for using native, water-wise plants.
And I was
I
just
mean,
going to say, I think that's probably a good question. I would maybe go down the rabbit hole with Steve, which is the question that a lot of people who are concerned with water have, which is, you can xeriscape, you can save water, but if you can increasingly increase the population, what you've done is, and you can get rid of alfalfa, certainly, and lots of horses, but what you do then is get rid of your ability to have any resilience. So then if climate change gets 20% worse, you sit there and say, there's no easy fix for our water problem because we've already gotten rid of alfalfa. So it is a very complex problem on the issue of growth. I'm not formulating a question. I just thought I'd go down the rabbit hole with you.
Yeah.
I just really appreciate you guys broaching this subject. I think, I really think in the end, it's going to be the planning commission that's on the cusp of, having to deal with, we can institute maybe water conservation efforts. I know the city of Moab has put together a team to do that, but I think you guys are really going to be on the cusp of having to make those decisions as to, types of development. And yeah, so I appreciate that you're attacking this.
And I would say it looks like Abby and I will have our work cut out for us and certainly come back to receive some criticism of our new question or questions here. Are we good? I guess 21. Oh, yes. This was the fire rings question. I just thought it probably wasn't. That was also suggested by probably the same group, maybe even after the group that Trish was talking about, but it probably isn't a general enough problem to have a question for. It's my guess.
I don't know if you get complaints. We definitely get complaints about burning in the county, right? I don't know if it's a fire ring person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the way this question is worded, definitely. I would suggest either scrap this question or maybe find a way to have a larger fire question of, do you support people burning weeds? Do you support people having fire rings? I don't know. What are your thoughts? Do you planning commissioners feel like this is an important question to include here or somewhere? Okay. I think I'm going to get rid of it then. I definitely, in my limited experience, have not gotten a lot of code complaint, of calls to my office about fire rings, but I'm sure that is an issue somewhere. So, all right, now we've gotten to the end.
Yeah, I guess this is just the kind of general question, if it's reasonably worded to let people have their say at the end of a survey.
Mhm.
My goodness gracious.
All right.
Steve,
How many questions are we up to now? Is that actual 22 or is that?
I think that is actual 22. And then like a 5 policy questions. So maybe, I mean, some of them are pretty, is that actual 22? No, it's not actual 22. There's some jumps in there. There's 2, yeah.
so Abby,
I
could you
think
tell us, so I'd be kind of curious since I don't have it. You've got the nice document in front of you. How many questions do we have in the quote first part of the survey?
let me see. Oh, thanks. Okay. Sorry, I can't find, I gotta just count them up. I can't find a good way to do it. 1.
You got fingers though.
Thank you, Abby and OB, for working on this, by the way. This is
Very welcome, Makeda. I hope I said it right there. I'm going to remember the A is there at the start.
We're actually only at 13 questions, and OB has really done the bulk of work on this the last few weeks. I'm at a point where I think I'll be able to jump in and be a little more helpful, but I echo that. Thank you for picking this up and doing so much work and keeping this moving forward. So I think 13 questions we can work with.
Is that
And then the
first part?
That's just the first part. And then in the
Right.
next part, I think there's about 5. It's 1, 2. Yeah, there's a PUD question, a high density question, a B&B question, and an ADU question. So only 4 really in the policy.
And as we said, we may end up with a couple of HDHO or high density
Yeah,
questions.
so let's say 5. So
but-
we're still under a 20 question
There.
survey, which I think is good. And I do like kind of the concept that Mark Horowitz brought up of, in a way, this is a survey that's kind of ramping. So, I'll restructure it so that for someone who doesn't really want to go too deep, they can answer a lot of the more straightforward questions at the beginning and still provide some valuable data. So I think the next step is OB and I working on, consolidating, incorporating the concepts from today. I'm going to reach out to active transportation and trails on the one question. I'm going to reach out to Grand Water on the water questions. I'm glad that Elaine Gisler from the Economic Development has been a part of this conversation a little bit too, so that we can, include that department in this survey, and then also reach out to San Juan County and just make them aware of what we're doing and see how we can share data if they're interested. And by the next meeting, hopefully we'll have a pretty close to final draft that we can make some, final tweaks to, and then shift focus to how to get the survey out to people.
And then unless people have any more comments on the survey, do we have any future considerations?
There are a couple. Now I've lost my agenda. There's a couple that are coming up that we've already touched on, and just Tricia did a great job of, kind of what's happening in Thompson. I think that's a big one on the horizon. And then we're also looking at how to make the assured housing provisions. I think I brought this up at the last meeting, but we're still working on things within the county before we have a draft to bring forward, but working on updating the assured housing part of the land use code to be more usable, I guess. Mm-hmm. So, but unfortunately, I don't have in the next few meetings, we'll have more details to go into on those issues. Any other future considerations that anyone would like to put on the radar?
So several months ago, we came out with a priority list, and my recollection is that I was tasked with working up something on water conservation policies. But anyway, it's been so long ago, I can't remember specifically what I was tasked to do, but there were several people that were invited to work with me on that issue. But if we're not too busy at our next meeting, if we could re-look at that priority list and do, see if the priorities are still there, and then get some fire behind tasks that have maybe kind of fallen behind the wayside, that would keep at least the highest priorities kind of moving on. This survey was included on that list, and I can't remember what else was on it at this moment.
Okay.
And didn't you, Gary, actually, there was a question you asked Sloan about water, was it?
Yeah.
And she said she was busy, and I think she was.
Well, she was busy, and I took that as okay, we've got a grace period, but now it's maybe time to at least on that. I mean, the water conservation issue was just part of this list, and I can't remember what else was on it other than this survey. So I think it'd be good just to revisit the list.
Yeah, we can do that.
So if there's nothing else, do we need a motion to adjourn the meeting?
We do.
I'm
I
making
will
a
make
motion.
that we adjourn.
I second.
Okay. How many are for it?
Aye.
Good meeting. Thank you all.
You did good job. You
Good
did a
job.
good job as the chair.
Adios.
Thank you, everyone.